Gail Biederman's Manliness and Civilization, A Cultural History of Gender and Race in the United States from 1880 to 1917, is structured in 6 chapters in order to present the argument that by analyzing turn of the 20th century civilization discourse, it becomes apparent that race and gender cannot be studied as if they were discrete categories. Everything, according to Biederman, is rooted in and revolves around discourse. For instance, the same discourse used to justify imperialism could simultaneously be used to argue against it. The word civilization was indeed protein in its applications, Biederman writes. Different people used it to legitimize conservatism and change, male dominance and militant feminism, white racism and African American resistance. Chapters focused on Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Ida B. Wells, G. Stanley Hall, and Teddy Roosevelt are, like the introduction focused on pugilist Jack Johnson, designed to illuminate larger class, race, and gender tropes in Fin-de-Siecle United States and England. The concluding chapter of Manliness and Civilization is perhaps what most connects it with other literature seemingly fueled by an anxiety towards the complex and tangled relationship between masculinity and capitalism, such as those written by Daniel Defoe and Jules Verne. Biederman's concluding chapter is a cultural study of Edgar Rice Burroughs' series of books Tarzan of the Apes, and other popular media's aping of the literature throughout the 20th century, most notably 45 different film depictions. Biederman argues that Fin-de-Siecle American manhood was not wholly a product of men. Women were also integral in shaping the discourse that defined American masculinity throughout the 20th century. Many women, such as Charlotte Perkins Gilman, cultivated so-called civilization discourse in order to challenge their own disenfranchisement, particularly in contrast to enfranchised black men. Indeed, women could simultaneously deploy the same discourse to bolster a more conservative, anti-modern, and dominant discourse that reified the need for protection from so-called savages such as Asian, European, and American job seekers in urban centers throughout the United States at the turn of the 20th century. The turn of the 20th century was a time when Americans began to synthesize new formulations of gender, Biederman writes. Hegemonic discourses of civilization explained concisely the precise relation between the male body, male identity, and male authority in a world rapidly transformed by global capitalism and ascendant transcontinental American imperialism. Her introductory section argues that Jack Johnson's superiority in the boxing ring against white opponents such as the so-called white man's champ, Jim Jeffries, served to implicitly challenge the ways hegemonic discourses of civilization built powerful manhood out of race. This part of Biederman's argument is in diametric contrast to John Hoberman's Darwin's Athletes, how sport has damaged black America and preserved the myth of race. Hoberman argues that Johnson's dominance of white opponents served, in the minds of many white racists, as evidence that white men were justified in using their supposed superior intellect to keep so-called savages such as Johnson, who was married to a white woman, in their so-called natural place, which was at the dregs of society. And so perhaps the greatest contribution of Manliness and Civilization is its assertion that Fin-de-Siecle American masculinity was as much, if not more, a product of women's activism and discourse as it was a product of well-to-do white men's forceful imperatives.